Hello, friends. Welcome back. This is our second sort of lecture. All right, it's not going to be terribly long, but it's going to, again, talk about some of the early building blocks, and then it's actually going to work into what we call Dixieland music, which is arguably some of the earliest jazz there is, okay? So, as I mentioned before, jazz developed in the African-American community in the South, particularly around New Orleans. New Orleans was the largest town in the southern United States in the former Confederacy. It's right there on the Mississippi River to the Caribbean Sea. Right, there's a tremendous amount of traffic, shipping traffic, and naval base. There's just all this kind of stuff. There's lots of people, and people are coming and going. And these people that are coming and going are bringing with them their culture and their music and their favorite foods and their traditions and all this kind of stuff. And people start to integrate and mix. You might have a German immigrant family next to an Italian immigrant family with a Chinese family across the street, and a family of freed slaves next door, and all this kind of stuff. And you just run into these people, get to know these people, integrate with these people on some degree. I'm sugarcoating it a little bit, but eventually you start to you hear a song coming out of somebody's window and you learn it, or maybe someone teaches you how to play an instrument from their country, or all this kind of stuff. These things just start to mix, right? So in New Orleans, because it's this large metropolitan area, you have all these people. You have every possible European country there. You have African slaves. Before the Civil War, you actually have literally African slaves. You have slaves from the West Indies who were brought from Africa into the Caribbean, and they stayed there for a generation or two. But now they're brought to the mainland with their influences and their music and that kind of stuff. You have Creoles. Creoles were white people of French descent. And then you have this term that is called Creoles of color, which is basically they're mixed race folks, the offspring of Creoles and their black slave mistresses or something like that. Early on here, we will use the terminology Creoles of color, but very soon it'll just be Creoles. When we're calling people Creoles, they will actually just be the people of mixed race heritage, right? All these people are in New Orleans. Everybody is kind of finding their way around in this new world, and you're going to see again some videos kind of covering this topic as well. All right. So just about everyone agrees that jazz originated here in this racially mixed and culturally diverse environment, right? All these different sorts of people from different parts of the world, all these different sorts of musical elements, pop tunes, marches, rags, opera, hymns, spirituals, brass band music. If you've ever been to New Orleans, the tradition of Mardi Gras and the music and all that sort of stuff, all that is there. And this is kind of where it all comes from. A style of playing that came out of the African-American community in particular, highly syncopated, embellishing the melodies. You still kind of, the good ones, you would know what the tune is that they're playing, but they would put their own personal style on it. And that's kind of what I want you to listen for a little bit today. Okay? There was a part of town in New Orleans where prostitution and drug use and all this kind of stuff, all this stuff was legal. It's called Storyville. And there's a lot of clubs there, a lot of brothels and all this sort of stuff. And so the competition of all these clubs is, we want to get the best customers in here. We want to get the most customers in here. So they need the best entertainment, in addition to, obviously, the employees of the brothels. You would have bands. They'd hire groups, and you're playing the best music to come in and dance with people who then you might, get other services from, that kind of stuff, right? These were everywhere in Storyville and other parts of New Orleans, right? Providing steady work to musicians. There was music and musicians everywhere. These traditions from all these different cultures and all these different styles of music produce early jazz. And because so many of the black community were not literate, they didn't know how to read music. None of that was helpful. They all played by ear. I'm painting with a broad brush, but most of them played by ear. That means improvising was so important, either collectively having a conversation with people, as a soloist, saying something, communicating through your horn, right? And then obviously the group swing feel and all that kind of stuff for dancing, whatever. All that stuff is very, very important, and it all sort of starts here, okay? Group polyphony is polyphonic music, is multiple melodies sort of happening at the same time. That's what group improvisation basically is, okay? You also have important political or social factors that you want to take into consideration when you're listening to some of this music, okay? First of all, there was, immediately after the Civil War, there was a period called Reconstruction. Reconstruction is where Northern troops occupied the South and they kept the peace as best they could. That lasted a dozen years or so. Then they left, and basically at that point, the power structure that existed pre-Civil War sort of reasserted itself, and they tried to put these, they can't be slaves anymore, but they are still different people. So they tried to put them back in their place. And what you had is a series of legislative maneuvers that created what's called Jim Crow laws, legally separating the races. Again, you eventually have Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896 saying separate but equal was constitutional. Before or during Reconstruction, and before the implementation of some of these Jim Crow laws, you basically had a three-tiered system in the South, where whites were generally on the top, blacks were on the bottom, and in the middle you had Creoles of color. They were both of mixed race heritage, and again, let's just hypothetical here, you're a Creole of color, you have black descendants and white descendants, and you're walking down the street in any town in the South in the 19th century, and you see how black people are treated, and you are part black, and you see how white people are treated, and you are part white. Which side would you lean towards? Whose culture would you imitate or adopt? Chances are, seeing how white folks were treated, you would more than likely try to elevate yourself and try to learn as much of your European descent as possible, right? Just survival. So a lot of Creole musicians did that. Creole musicians studied music. They became classical musicians. They learned classical music. They learned how to play their instruments properly. They learned how to read music. So you had these great trumpet players who could play just as well as any white players. These great clarinet players could play just as well as any white players. Well, once Jim Crow laws were instituted, there's a wide variety of them, but one of the most common you'll see in a video clip is Louisiana passed a law that said if your grandfather was a slave or your grandparents were a slave, if you were free to vote before, now that if you had a grandparent that was a slave, you can no longer vote, right? And they would keep passing these sorts of oppressive laws. So people of African American descent could not vote, and if you don't have a voice, you're not going to get any change, or any of that sort of stuff. So it was very oppressive sorts of things. These are the Jim Crow laws, and so when these started passing, basically the Creoles of color, that middle tier, lost their middle tier status, and it became from a three-tiered system, it became a two-tiered system, and you were either white or black. Any degree of if you were 1/8 black, in the eyes of the law, you were still black. So you lost a lot of these privileges. And if you were a great piano player or a great Creole piano player or a great Creole trumpet player or clarinet player or something, you used to have like a symphony orchestra for Creoles or an opera orchestra for Creoles. Now you don't have that anymore. That went away. So you're a musician, it's your job. You can't move up into the white orchestras. So you had to move down into the black community. And now you're playing the blues, and now you're playing dances, and now you're playing more of that sort of rough and tumble scene with a lot of less educated, again, non-literate musicians who play by ear and that kind of stuff. So you bring your skill set there, and it sort of elevates the music. Unfortunate for every other reason, but generally elevates the level of play, that kind of stuff. All right. These are the things that sort of happen. Okay. So now I want to get down to Dixieland. All right. This is sort of our first type of jazz. And we're going to talk specifically about New Orleans Dixieland and how to listen to it and what happens to it and that kind of stuff. Okay. So jazz forms in New Orleans, around New Orleans. It's a blend of all these things. Dixieland is that too. It's taking Dixieland, ragtime piano, boom chick, and all that sort of, and highly syncopated melody, and giving it to instruments. It's blues and essentially, one person playing something and another person responding to it. It's bringing that into the mix. It's all this sort of stuff. Creating a group ensemble. All right, so a blending of ragtime, blues, spirituals, just now played on instruments. Again, largely uneducated, so they have to improvise. All these instruments that they use come from a variety of places that were available in New Orleans. Brass bands, symphony orchestras, military bands because of the naval base and stuff like that, right? The blues guitar players and piano and all that sort of stuff. Society is here because any middle class house typically had a piano in their parlor, right? So they bought piano sheet music and they learned how to play the piano and all that kind of stuff. So now these great Creole piano players are now working in black clubs and that kind of stuff, all right? This is how it happens. What I want you to understand about Dixieland is how it's put together. So when you start listening to it, you can sort of take it apart and then hopefully, put it back together. There are two parts to a Dixieland band. There's the front line, which is made up typically of the horn players. So it's most common that there are three horns. There's a trumpet or a cornet. A cornet is a shorter, fatter trumpet. That's all it is. So a cornet, a trombone, and a clarinet. That's typical instrumentation for a Dixieland band. Okay? And then you have a rhythm section. The rhythm section, depending on whether it's outdoors or indoors, it can vary a little bit, right? If it's inside, it might be a string bass, piano, and a drum set. Might be. There's any number of variations here. If it's outdoors, you can't march with a string bass, so they might play a tuba instead. You can't march with a drum set, so they might bring out like some field drums or something like that. Any number of things could happen here, okay? But what you need to know is what these groups do, or what these things, how they interact, how they make this music, okay? So let's say they're going to play the blues. Everybody in the group knows the 12-bar blues, and now they know kind of what key they're going to play in. Let's play it in F or something like that, right? So they all know what the chords are and when they change, so we're good there, okay? How does it work? Well, the trumpet player is typically the leader, and that person, trumpet or cornet, that person is going to play the tune. So they're going to play the melody. So if it's When the Saints Go Marching In, the trumpet player is going to play the melody that you recognize as When the Saints Go Marching In. But they're not going to play it boring and straight. They're going to rag it up. They're going to swing it. They're going to improvise around it. You'll still recognize it, but they'll change it. They'll syncopate it. They'll, again, rag it up a little bit. That's the trumpet player's job. When the trumpet or cornet is doing that, the clarinet player, which can typically play faster, they're going to improvise like counter melodies with the trumpet. So the trumpet's playing the tune, right? They're kind of going to go back and forth and create a dialogue and improvise together, right? The clarinet knows what the trumpet player is kind of going to do, so he plays something to complement it in a sense, right? Meanwhile, the trombone, the biggest and lowest of these instruments, is also sort of waiting his turn and improvising and complementing what the other two guys are doing and maybe outlining the bass lines a little bit and that kind of stuff. Those three instruments make up the front line, and they are collectively improvising together. So when you listen to some of the examples I post, I think it's helpful to listen to the clarinet the first time through, and then go back and listen for the trumpet, and then go back and listen for the trombone, and then see how they sort of all interact with each other. They're short tunes. It won't take too long, right? While that's happening, The rhythm section, which is your piano, bass, drums, or some equivalent there like that, they're basically playing a 1, 2, 3, 4, bump, 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 very straight ahead, 4 beats to the bar, not doing like a 2-beat thing, but more of a 4-beat thing without accents. Everything is even and steady, very easy to dance to. Okay, there could be individual solos in this music, but more often than not, the bread and butter is in the ensemble collective improvisation. That is the most important part of this sort of music here, okay? That is what they are doing, and that's the part I want you to take away from this, from the recordings I give you, okay? Some of the earliest performers of New Orleans-style Dixieland, Buddy Bolden. You'll see a clip about Buddy Bolden and Freddie Kephart. Buddy Bolden was arguably the very first jazz musician. Led a band. Again, all these guys, these early leaders are typically trumpet players. Buddy Bolden led a band. Kind of an unfortunate story of his life, but that you'll see that in the clip, right? Freddie Kephart was another one. He actually turned down the opportunity to be the first recorded jazz musician. Okay. The original Dixieland Jazz Band, they were the first group to record jazz in 1917, became very, very popular because of it. That first record had the Dixieland Jazz Band One Step. That is not a misprint. And Livery Stable Blues. Sidney Bechet was a great clarinetist. Later, he switched to a soprano saxophone, which is basically a metal clarinet, but a saxophone. Sidney Bechet is the only exception in these early instrumental roles. And by those roles, I mean, again, the trumpet usually plays the tune and the clarinet plays a counter melody. Well, Sidney Bechet was the boss of his band, and he's like, I'm going to play the tune and you're going to react to me. So in his case, it's the clarinet or the soprano saxophone that is playing the tune, while the trumpet player in his band would then sort of act as a counter melody to him. Sidney Bechet was one of the great early jazz musicians, second only to Louis Armstrong as far as technical ability and innovation. We're going to get into Louis Armstrong in much greater depth later. But these are some early New Orleans Dixieland musicians. So I'm going to upload a couple of tunes for you to listen to in this early New Orleans Dixieland style. I want you to check them out. Again, sort of pick them apart. Please understand that many of these were recorded very early, before the microphone. The microphone was invented in 1925. So the sound quality is not going to be spectacular. That being said, try and listen to the trumpet part. Try and listen to the clarinet. Try and listen to the trombone. Try and dissect it a little bit and hear the interaction between all the groups, all right? Hopefully you've been following along with the clips from the Ken Burns series. And that's it for now, right? We'll come back with the next video is going to be jazz sort of moving out of New Orleans and spreading across the country a little bit more. But this is enough for now. So you guys, again, have a lovely afternoon. And let me know if you have any questions at any time, okay? See you next time. Bye-bye.